All right, welcome everybody to another Brew and Ink podcast. This is another Interbrew.
Interbrews.
Yes. And,
number 3, by the way.
Well, I think it'd be number 4, actually.
Oh, it will be number 4.
You're
right. We'll edit that out.
Yes.
I'm kidding.
But I'm feeling really good that we're getting these locked in place so that we can be a few ahead.
We are. So this is awesome.
Yeah. And we have a very special guest with us today. We are so excited to have on this episode Sharon Hinck with us. Say hi to all our listeners out there.
Hello, everybody. Good to be here at Brew and Ink.
Yes, and I kind of first met Sharon through Facebook. I was trying to set up the Brew and Ink Facebook page, and Facebook kept popping up saying, "Hey, you should check out this page. Hey, you should check out this page." And I was like, okay, let me see who this is. And I was looking, and I was like, okay, this work looks pretty cool. And then it had some of my friends were already following you, and I was like, let me just reach out to her. And she seems to be, she's got some good followers on here. Maybe she can give me some words of wisdom. And you were great. You responded, and you were more than happy to give suggestions. And it was the beginning of starting a good friendship. And then we got to meet face to face over the summer in July.
That was so fun. It was so great to meet you at Realm Makers.
Realm Makers was awesome. I'm already looking forward to next year.
Yeah. It was amazing. Such creative people.
Yeah. And what was great, the way that I figured out you were going to be there was you were on the list of speakers. You were talking about you had 3 continuing sessions.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, she did.
Yeah.
And I think I begged you to come to my session because I was afraid there'd be absolutely nobody who would show up for it, and I'd be really embarrassed.
And it was packed.
And so, I made the promise I would be the one person if no one else showed up. But yeah, it was packed, and it was really good.
When I found out people had signed up for it, then my next fear was, well, there'll be people at the first session, but nobody will come back for the second session.
Yeah, sure.
And that'll be even more embarrassing.
Yeah.
So, yes, I'm angst-ridden, but...
I think you texted me or messaged me, like, at one point. You're like, oh, my gosh, Sharon Hinck is going to be there. Like, and he was so excited. So why don't you just start and just tell people kind of how long you've been writing, maybe how you got into writing, just a couple of those kind of basic things. Tell people about yourself in a few seconds.
Sure.
Or more than a few seconds.
Well, yeah, I write novels, so I'm never succinct. But I've been writing all my life. Teachers were always saying, "Ooh, you should think about being a writer." I loved it, and I mean, from the time I was little. But to me, I loved books so much. I would go to the library and come home with the huge stack. And I thought authors were just these magical beings. So I didn't think I could really ever be one. Mm. So I loved to write, but it was like I told myself, oh, don't get a big head. Don't think you can really do this. But when I was in grad school, I had a professor who would mark up my papers with tons of red ink, but then tell me where to submit it for publication. So he'd say, oh, send this to this magazine. Oh, this article you should submit to this magazine. And I got my first publication where I got a paycheck and everything. And he would always joke that the only good news from an editor was a paycheck. So when I got my first one, I went into his office and waved it in front of him. And so
I am a writer.
Yeah, I am. It happened. And that just sort of broke that barrier where I thought it could only be somebody else. But I was really busy. I was, finishing up grad school, and then I ran a Christian dance company. I was the artistic director for 10 years. Mm. And so I was doing everything, choreographing and managing and fundraising and writing newsletters and performing and speaking at workshops. And I had 4 little ones. So, wow. And during that time, I also made 3 trips to Hong Kong with YWAM to work with their dance team. So busy time. So most of my writing then was very utilitarian, like letters to our patrons or devotions in the newsletters that we wrote, things like that, and scripts for the company. And then I had to step back from the dance ministry. I was burnt out. I was exhausted, doing ministry plus arts and arts ministry. It's just grueling. You're just, it never ends and there's never enough support. And anyway, so during that time, I felt like, what's next in my life? I thought I would be doing this dance company the rest of my life. And one day I was praying about it. And this was a process that took a couple of years, but I was praying about it, and all I heard God say in my heart was, right. So I was like really excited. I finally got some direction. He's telling me what to do next with my life.
Yeah.
Right. And then I went, but wait, right what? For who? What kind? What? How? What?
How do I do this?
Yeah, exactly. And because I had done some magazine writing in the past and devotional writing, I thought, I suppose I should go back to doing more of that. And everything just felt flat and wrong. And I wasn't even submitting anything. I couldn't even get an article written. It was just like, this is not it. I have no passion for this. Mm. And so I started praying for a writer's group because I figured accountability would help and other people. And my husband happened to lose his job, which turned out to be one of those cool God things because he went to a networking event in video production, and he met a scriptwriter there who started talking about this great Christian writing group she was part of. And he said, my wife is looking for something like that. So God,
he found something for you and not for himself.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing for him, but that came later. But so I went to the writers group. Everybody was working on novels, and they were having so much fun. So I would bring in my old tear sheets from magazines and read some parenting article, and they'd all go, yeah, that's well written. Thank you for sharing. And then they'd read the next chapter of their cool fantasy novel. Right. And they were having so much fun, and I thought, maybe I should try and write a novel. So I started writing The Restorer, and that was my first novel. Mm. It wasn't the first one to get published. It took a while because it is speculative fiction and also very Christian in theme and content. So that combination was tough. Yeah. But I blasted it out. I mean, I just wrote and wrote and wrote. I was writing at piano recitals. I was writing at soccer games. We had one family computer in the family room, so the kids were all there working on homework, playing games, doing things while I was writing. So it was a fun experience, and got it done and was very excited about the story. I fell in love with the characters. I had no clue if it had any merit or if I had any chops, but I loved it and wanted to do something with it. So I emailed a friend that I had done some writing for when he was editor of Christian Parenting magazine. And I said, I did something. I wrote a novel. What do I do now? And he said, well, I think you should go to a writer's conference. Then you can meet agents and editors and find out if it's in the ballpark or not, find out if anyone's interested. So I Googled Christian writers' conferences to find the closest time-wise, like the next possible conference I could go to. And it was Mount Hermon, which is a wonderful Christian writing conference out in California. Mm. And it was coming up in just a couple weeks. So they put me on a waiting list because it was full, but then I got in and took all the money out of my sock drawer and went to the conference. And I was telling Steve earlier, I did everything wrong. I mean, first of all, I got to the conference and everybody's buzzing around. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody's finding the tags of the people who are agents and editors and pitching already. And I was just trying to pick up my packet of, the welcome packet. And I'm looking around and it was like being in this Shark Tank. I mean, It really, it's intense. And I went back to my room and burst into tears and just said, Lord, why am I here? I don't fit. This is crazy. And then I calmed down and started going to the classes. And then I would sit in the classes turning red because they'd say, now you should never do this.
And you're like, oh.
And so it was a hard and scary conference. Writers' conferences can be kind of overwhelming. You're getting all this information. It's kind of this new world. But I did get an opportunity to give my proposal to a couple of agents, and they liked it. And this was for The Restorer, which it's amazing that they even took a second glance at it because it was such a hard one to place.
Yeah.
And So I ended up getting an agent, and that got me off and running. And then I was so excited that somebody believed in my books that I wrote books 2 and 3 of the series that year. No contract or anything yet, but just because somebody believed in me, and I kept going. And then my agent, I switched agents. Then my new agent suggested, what are some other genres you like? And I had read a really excellent general market mom lit, really well written. It dug into the whole theme of how women put so much pressure on themselves. And I thought, I would love to examine that from a Christian perspective, because I think as Christian women, we do that even more, that we just pile on the pressure.
More expectations.
Not only do I have to serve my husband and my children and my church and my community, but I should be saving souls, and I should be, we just put so much on ourselves. So I wrote The Secret Life of Becky Miller about a young mom who's overwhelmed and struggling and has all these daydreams. So my daydream parts were kind of like fantasy writing, because I snuck it in there.
Creative, yeah.
If you remember that short story, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, that's what inspired the title, and it was that same sort of idea. She's going through her ordinary life, but in her head, she's, fighting pirates, and she's all doing all these cool, secret agent and doing all these cool things.
I love that kind of character setup. Yeah. Like, I loved the most recent Secret Life of Walter
that was
Mitty.
A great movie.
Yeah.
I was pleasantly surprised with how good that movie that was.
Yeah. So I was at a small local conference, and an editor from Bethany House was there, but I knew that they didn't publish the sort of story like The Secret Life of Becky Miller. But I brought my first chapter. I had an appointment, and I went in, and I didn't want him to think that I was ignorant, that I hadn't researched his house to know what they looked at. So I said, I know you don't publish this. I'm not asking you to consider it. I just would love for you to read it and tell me how I can improve. What do I need as a writer? Where do I need to strengthen my writing skills? So he starts reading it. He starts chuckling. And then at the end, I said, okay, what can I work on? What should I do to grow as a writer? And he said, have your agent send it. And I went, but you don't, this is where I'm a little slow. I should have just went, yay. But instead I started arguing. I was like, but you don't publish this kind of novel.
You're telling him, no, you don't want this.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was doing. I'm serious when I tell you I did everything wrong. But then he said, what you don't know is that we're looking into branching into contemporary fiction, and this would fit the niche if it holds up, so have your agent send me the manuscript. And I got my first contract. Yay. They did a 2-book contract. We did The Secret Life of Becky Miller and Renovating Becky Miller, which is one of those fun stories based on some experiences in my life of when you're going to fix up a house and you think, this will be a snap, and it'll be so fun. And get in over your head. And
It sounds like, a very common story that we've been hearing from these other authors that we've been talking to. Like, they'll have their first project that they write and they really like, and they've got it, and they they pour some more time into it, and they try and get it out there, but really it ends up being like their second or third thing that they write that gets published first, and then that allows that first project that really is your baby to eventually get back in there somehow, get into the publication world. So
exactly.
It's good.
And that's why, too, I tell people, I meet a lot of writers. I do editing freelance editing for writers. And the ones who keep reworking that first book and keep bringing that same book to conferences year after year, they're kind of stuck in a rut. And yes, you treasure it. You don't have to give up on it. But put it aside and start a new book. Try a new genre. Try a new story world. Whatever it takes. Because you need to keep moving, keep writing other things, and later you might be able to go back to it. And that's what happened with me. That then Nav Press picked up the first 3 Restorer books, and so then those did finally get to be published, which was.
And I've been in your head for the past 48 hours trying to finish off the Restorer book, and I really liked it. And for me, sometimes it's hard to picture the character in the book when I know who wrote it. because I'll be picturing, But I feel like you did you put a lot of yourself into this character that's in The Restorer. She's like what you were talking about with when you went to the conference. You got overwhelmed and you kind of like pulled away at first, but then you went back. You like talked to the Lord, and that got you recentered. And your character does that a lot in this book. Like she gets in over her head and she'll get overwhelmed, and then she recenters herself, and then from like staying rooted in. And I thought you did such a great job of being able to bring in verses and scriptures and prayer into this book without making it like it's there in your face, like it is, what's in the story, but you did it in a way that makes it works, like
makes it genuine.
It makes it genuine, and it makes it integral to the story that you're telling. And I really liked that.
Yeah. A reader who contacted me said, "Can I just ask, are you Lutheran?" Which I am. And she said, I could tell because the way I structured the worship life, there was this call and response.
Yeah.
It was not at all what like the Catholic or Lutheran or Presbyterian liturgy uses. It's not those words, but it was that rhythm in their worship. And it just, that cracked me up that showed through. But Stephen, I have to tell you, even my editor, when I was working on the books with the publisher, would sometimes call me Susan instead of Sharon because he would mix me up with the character. But honestly, I have more in common with Kieran.
Yeah.
So, I think that's the character I relate to the most in those books. Honestly.
Interesting. And that's good.
He's a little bit snarly.
Yeah.
But
he likes to hold knives to people a lot.
Yeah.
And in the same vein of kind of this topic, I know we had talked about the other day, just kind of hitting on maybe some key craft problems that you've come across in your writing and your journey.
Yes. All the things that I heard in the writing conference that I was doing wrong, but now try to get a little better at. That's a good one. One of the things, and especially you both write speculative fiction, right? I know what you're working on, and that's what you primarily write also. Yeah. It seems more problematic in speculative fiction, although I see it in all kinds of genres. But loading the front end with tons of explanation and backstory is a big common mistake that people make. And I know I heard Jim Bell say once, go ahead and write the novel, write your first draft, and then cut out the first two chapters.
Yeah.
Because people usually put stuff in those first two chapters that they think the reader needs, but really the reader doesn't need. Yeah. And the writer needs it. You need that information in your head, but it wrecks the story. Because what you're doing is you're giving solutions. You're not giving hooks. You're not, you want to have a question come up in the mind of the reader saying, oh, they just mentioned this weird ceremony. What does that mean? What is that ceremony? You don't want to stop and explain it to the reader. You want to hook them so they keep reading, like, what is this? And then in speculative fiction, too, I really love when an author is able to let you explore the world with the characters, not stop and explain it to the reader. Or even worse, put it into awkward dialogue. So-and-so, that we have this ceremony every year because, which two people would never be saying to each other, that kind of explanatory dialogue. So that's another thing that comes up a lot that I see. The other thing is just the meaningless words that kind of bloat our manuscripts. And I talk that way, so I write that way, and then I have to go through and hone and hone and hone because I heard a quote from David Mamet who said he's just this great playwright, and he says he views writing as shaving syllables. I mean, he literally is just so precise that every syllable has a reason to be there. And there's not all of the just and some and kind of and maybe and just all the meaningless words that get kind of tossed in there.
Yeah, just is one of mine that I always have to go back and cut out, and always find their way in there. I don't know why.
Yeah, one of the ones I've been cutting a lot of is so.
Yeah.
And And again, as you found, probably like me, like you can put some of that extra fluff in dialogue at times to give people voice, to give people,
gives them their voice.
It gives them a little personality, but you have to be really careful with the prose about, keeping it not just concise, but just like you're saying, everything has to have a purpose.
Vibrant. You want every word to be vibrant, and that's another of the common issues where people will pile on lots of adverbs because they're trying to make really clear what's going on. When if you would just pick a vibrant verb, that's all you would need. Mm-hmm. So that's another thing that I see a lot of. And another big issue that's a little bit harder for people is scene structure. People will write scenes that is just stuff happening because they want to show a typical day in the life of this alien or whatever, and so they show them doing this, and the other thing and talking to somebody and having breakfast and going and doing something else, which gives a little bit of background information, but it goes nowhere. It doesn't have conflict. It doesn't have tension. There's no goal. And so just learning at the start of every scene, Karen Hancock was such a generous mentor to me early on when I was working on Restore. And she said, always say at the beginning of the scene what the character's goal is for that scene, that this is what we're rooting for, that this is, even if it's a small thing, like I'm going to go catch fish, whatever, but you know their goal, and then obstacles come up in their way, conflicts, interruptions, whatever. And I said, well, yeah, but I don't want to be that obvious and like stated up front. And she said, no, I really mean that. Actually state it in the scene, at the beginning of the scene, have the point of view character say, to themselves or to another character, this is my goal. This is what I'm going to do. It helped me so much. You don't have to literally always say, have the character say, my goal today is, or, I'm going to this place because I really need such and such. You can be a little more subtle, but it helped break me of that habit of those boring stuff happening scenes where really
it has no importance to the story itself.
Exactly. Doesn't move it forward at all.
I think it's also good. It's a good way to kind of set up the expectation for the reader as well. They know, okay, this is what we're going to do, and then when that happens, there's a sense of completion.
And they care because you get them to root for your point of view character. You get them to want what the point of view character wants so much that they begin to worry for them. It's like, I'm going to go to my doctor and get the results of the latest brain scan. And, I'm hoping that they find out that I'm going to be okay. Well, the reader starts to root for the character and worry. And then along the way, there's a traffic jam and she can't get to the office and the doctor's leaving and the nurse won't give them the information. And, you get the obstacles and the conflict, and that keeps the reader going forward. And they just want it even more than the character wants it. And that's really good.
And something I found in the process of me going back and kind of rewriting and editing, as I've been writing proposals, some of these proposals want you to give 2-sentence outlines of every chapter. And I find that that's really good to help okay.
Does this scene even need to be in there?
Yeah, does this need to be in here? Is this going along the lines of what's important from this chapter? I've got these 2 sentences. It covers this chapter. Okay, but I've also got all these other paragraphs that don't really go along with this goal, and it kind of helps you keep it succinct. And I was thinking to myself,
focused.
I'm like, I should do this at the onset of writing, like, kind of keep myself a little more focused. I'm definitely a discovery writer. What were they calling it?
A pantser. Someone was calling it.
Yeah, pantser.
By the seat of your pants. I call myself a discovery writer, where I have a premise. I have a story question. Like, here's my character. Here's the character's problem. I wonder what's going to happen next. Yeah. And then I have a sense as I get into the story of what I'm aiming for, which helps. But otherwise, I like to be surprised. And I have tried outlining. I've tried Randy Ingermanson's wonderful snowflake method. Did not work for me. When I outline, to me, it feels like I'm doing homework.
Yeah.
I write the outline, and then it's like, oh, now fill in all the dot to dots. And
it's funny. As much as I will try to outline, there will still be a character that shows up out of nowhere and takes over the scene and is now like, I am now in this story. And you're like, but you weren't in the outline. Wait, what are you doing?
Yeah,
that
I mean,
is the best.
Yes.
Yeah, for me, I'm a little more of an outliner, but I think Brandon Sanderson's way, the way he talked about it was the most, the closest to what I do, which is there are like major points of the plot that I get to.
Yeah.
But how I get there is discovery writing, right? Like, okay, I know this is where I'm going.
Yep.
There are like four main scenes I want to get to, or there are four main things that I want to get to. And so, but then like you're saying, like at some point your characters become not characters, they're actual real people. And so sometimes they do stuff and you're like, oh, well, what are you doing? Like, I'm trying to get you over here.
Yeah.
So for me, there's a balance, but some people are just like you're saying, some people have to be one way or the other, but I think I'm a little bit more of a mix.
I envy my friends who are outliners, and they can crank out books a lot faster too, because they do the outline, they brainstorm with people, they check to make sure that the plot works, and then they fill it in and write it. And I wish I could, because it would save a lot of time, because I go down rabbit trails and then I have to delete. My husband jokes, I have a writing goal of like, pretty modest, of like 500 words a day. And he said, yeah, but hon, you got to give yourself credit. You're writing about 2,000 words a day. It's just you're deleting 1,500 of them.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's totally how I write.
Well, and for me as an outliner, there's a lot more brainstorming that goes on in the beginning. I mean, just as a trade-off, someone asked me the other day about my first fantasy novel that I self-published, The Living Stone. He said, how long did it take you to write it? I said, well, physically to write it, 6 months, but it was 6 years before I even started. That idea and the overall scope of the story,
brainstorming and
that's
world
been
developing.
that's been in my brain for 6 years.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and this is something else we wanted to talk about, was pitfalls of world building. And I think that's some of the things that as a discovery writer, you'll write yourself into these pits and you're like, oh, now how do I keep this consistent?
Yes. Oh my goodness. And I thought, just for fun, when I was working on the Restorer world, and I had like reams of info. Oh, this is another key thing for speculative fiction writers. It's great to come up with a history of all the clans and all the people and go back for generations and know the geography of everything and, the science, the technology, everything. That's great info, but don't put most of it in the book.
Yeah.
Because it just bogs everything down, and it's meant to be texture. It's not meant to take over the book. But yeah, as I was working on the Restorer, I thought, okay, I've read so many medieval fantasies and I want this to be different. So there will be technology, but it'll be technology based on a whole different development. This is a different world. So, and it's a world where they've never seen the sun, the moon, the stars, because it's enshrouded with this gray fog all the time. Well, that means they would never have had a sundial, which means they would never measure in minutes and hours, which means, and so I kind of thought through the science and the technology and how do they have technology, what is it based on? They don't have fire. They never saw the sun. They never had that idea of flame. And so all of their heat comes from electromagnetic sources. It's a whole different thing. So I had to develop all of that. And then for some reason, I thought it would be cool that they don't have a written language. So everything is culturally, they have to memorize. So they're much better at memorizing than we are.
Yeah.
But they pass down the verses. And, it got so difficult. What's really tricky is when you're doing like little similes and metaphors and you catch yourself saying, his temper flared, or blazed like a flame. You go, oh, wait, they don't have flames. They can't, this world doesn't have that. It's so tricky, and you want to be consistent. And I get so thrown out of a book if I'm reading it and suddenly they make they use some idiomatic phrase that's a modern phrase that references,
wouldn't fit into that world.
It references technology that is ours but not theirs.
Yeah.
And so you have to really go through and try to catch any time that you might have done that. But it did make it fun, and it made it an interesting other world.
Yeah.
It wasn't Trekkie, it wasn't medieval fantasy, it was a complete other, which my first agent, he said, the strength of this book is it is so unique, it is so unlike any other, but that's also what's going to make it really hard to find a home for it and to market it, because where do we put it on the shelf even?
Right.
And one of the things that I picked up in here, and I don't know if this was something you went back on, is like, oh, I need to fix this, or if this is what you had from the get-go, but you deal with time anomalies between our world and theirs, but you have it going both ways. So like, when they're in the other world, time is going really slow, only a couple hours in our world. But then also at the same time, if you're in this world, you could live 22 years and time has gone down slow in their world. And I was like, wait, how does it work both ways? And then you have you fixed it kind of by having the characters be like, well, it works, relative to where you're at. You know what? I'm not going to understand it. Let's not talk about this anymore. Like, let's not focus on that. Yeah.
I know.
It's like, oh, nice save.
I know. Oh, well, and the other thing, early on, when she's pulled into this other world, I was grappling with, okay, they're all speaking English. She understands them. That doesn't make sense. But that's going to bog down the story horrendously if I have to have her learn a language, if I have to. So I just had it that she understood and they understood her and they could communicate. And then I think I gave Tristan some line about, she goes, I don't understand this. Well, if the one sent you here, he would equip you. And, so it. Yeah,
he's like, no, we're not speaking English. You just understand us.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the Babel fish. They're like, oh, we just have this fish that we put in our ear and it translates anyone from any.
or the universal translators in Star Trek,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, one of the cool experiences that I had at Realm Makers, other than obviously your class, and for those
the Nerf War,
right, and for those people who didn't get to go to your class and are listening, you were so excited to be there, and it was so contagious to everybody that was in that room. But it was interesting. So the last night, on Saturday night, we had the Nerf gun war, and I'm older, so I did a few games, and I'm like, okay, I'm out, and
he became the timekeeper.
I became the timekeeper, and so I'm sitting over there on the side, and another guy kind of sat down next to me, and we started talking, and it was Alan Arnold.
Oh yeah.
And I didn't know, I'd kind of recognized him, saw him around, and he and I just had this really great conversation. And one of the first things he asked me was, what kind of themes do you have in your book? Like, it wasn't even like, tell me about your books and, your genre, like the normal kind of writer. Mm-hmm. Like the first questions for writers are, what's your genre? Exactly. Who's your main character even? Like, even if they want to go a little deeper, like he went straight for theme. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciated that because, for those of us who are trying to inject our stories with more than just excitement or more than just good characters, more than just good story. We're trying to say something deeper with our stories.
Something with eternal value.
Something of value.
Something worth taking away when you read the story.
So what about for you? What are some themes that you find yourself, because there's so many that we could have, right? I mean, obviously, but what are some themes for you that you find yourself returning to, or just, that you could really point to in your books that are very important to you?
One of the things that comes up in pretty much all my novels is I have a tagline, stories for the hero in all of us. I have these unlikely heroines. It's women who feel weak and yet are empowered when they rely on God and do things that they didn't think they could do. And I write for the mom who just found out that their son is diagnosed with autism, or the friend whose best friend just finds out she has breast cancer. and they want to be a hero to that son or to that friend, or the husband loses his job. How can I support him? They want to be a hero in their life, and they're facing a path that they didn't expect. And it's harder than they expected, and they don't know the rules. It's like my character Susan pulled through the portal into this new world, and she's expected to fill this role, and she wants to serve God here. But she's overwhelmed, and she doesn't know the rules, and she doesn't know how God could possibly use her. And that's the kind of reader that I write for, is women who are really living heroic lives. I mean, the women that I know are doing that, but they don't see it. They see themselves as muddling along or as very weak and frail. And I find it interesting too. And this was, I have some health issues, some chronic health challenges. And before those even began, I had my characters dealing with some health things that don't resolve, that don't get fixed in one book. Becky Miller ends up, I won't spoil it, but she has something happen to her, and that continues on into the second book, and it isn't fixed. And it's a real difficulty for her. So I do tend to have not just average women characters, and the men too are also often dealing with this. Average people being called to do things beyond themselves, but broken characters, and physically weak and broken characters who are called to do things beyond themselves. And so that's another theme that comes up a lot. And then the theme of surrendering to God, I dealt with it in The Restorer. Yes. Real directly, and have grappled with that so much in my life of what does surrender look like. And it's not, you hear the word surrender and it's like an army that lays down its arms and gives up and is subjugated by the other army. But that's not what God wants. That's not why God wants us to surrender to him. It's not a subjugation. It's the way I described it in The Restorer, as she's grappling with God about all of this, is, like floating on a lake, and the water is supporting you, and you stop flailing around, and he carries you, and that's the kind of surrender.
You described also like going down a mountain on like a sled or a toboggan. Like there's a surrender in that. It may be exhilarating, and it could even possibly be dangerous, but there's a surrender to that.
Yeah.
Well, just going back to that first, I love both of the themes, by the way. And going back to that first theme, I wonder what kind of response you've had from some of your readers, because I'm married and I have two sisters and a mom, and I know some very strong women in my life, some very competent and strong women, but they feel like they're not doing a good job, right? Like the feeling within them isn't, like, to me, they're not, none of them are near as confident as I think they should be. Like, I'm like, no, really, you can do this. You're awesome. Like, and you could probably say the same thing about Giselle. And I'm just so, I wonder what kind of response you've gotten from women, because I could see that being almost a universal issue among, especially, I mean, I can't speak for every culture, but women in the West, like you're saying, have so many, whether it's their physical body image to balancing life, work, home, and now when if you get the church thing, are they serving enough at church, and just all, like you were saying earlier, all those pressures. Like, what kind of response have you gotten from women about that?
I've gotten some. That, to me, that's like the best thing about being a writer is the emails and the letters. Sometimes some of my readers don't even have computers, and they actually send me handwritten letters, which is just so precious. So yes, letters saying, how did you know my life? Were you peeking into my life? This character is me. How did you know? But there's that element of being in every woman that the character has. And although we don't get pulled through a portal into another world, and we don't have really fascinating backstories with our husbands. Stephen, did you get to the twist?
I did.
Did you like the twist?
I did.
Okay.
I was wondering
I'm
what
not
you were
gonna
going to
say-
do with him. I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
you keep mentioning him, and then you came in. I was like, oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
The first agent that read the book, when he got to that point, he said, I got there and I thought, you can't do that. That's like not the typical fantasy trope.
Right.
You can't do that. And then he said, but you made it work.
Yep.
And but anyway, I'm sorry. Now I lost track. What was it?
When people respond and they write you
Yes.
letters. Yeah.
And I think one of the
Yeah,
reasons why people are responding so well is you do have the ability to make your characters relatable and seem realistic into things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, whether it's inward or the things that we're receiving outwardly.
Yeah. And I think that even in I mean, like, and as a part of your class, like, to realize that whether it's Christian fiction or not, we have to inject our characters with some sort of universal struggle. Mm-hmm. And whether you're a man or a woman, we have, I forget the statistics, if I were smart enough, I could remember, but like Dave Ramsey or somebody who said, like, everybody deals with like 2 or 3 major life crises. And like within their life, you're going to deal with a certain number of surprise life issues that completely derail everything, Yeah. And you're going to just have to like, how do you prepare for that? But I mean, but so average people having to deal and be heroes in a situation that they weren't expecting to be heroes in is that's a universal thing to me.
Yeah.
So
well, and then having it be, it's this fun fantasy adventure. It's not anything specific to our real life. I mean, she's carrying a sword. She's leading clans into battle. But the mom with the autistic son identifies and says, this is me. This is my journey. And that's the power of symbol. And I know I talked about that in the class about how important symbol is in the novel, because everyone can bring their own situation to it. So the friend who's sitting at the hospital bed of her friend can say, oh, this is what it feels like. You're just trying to help and everything's going wrong. The mom with the autistic child, the woman whose elderly parents are having dementia, and how do we cope? How do I handle it? This was a world I didn't expect to have to enter. And, what are my weapons? What tools do I have? Who are my allies? And so they can read this story, which has nothing to do with everyday modern American life and the things they're experiencing, and yet it is their life. One woman at Realm Makers came up to me and she said, I never reread any books. I just never do. But she said, I've reread the Restorer series 7 times.
Wow.
And I know. And she said, I know, it was so cool. I was so touched. And she said, every time it motivates me to memorize scripture more. And I love that. It was like, wow, if reading these books can get you, I want people to be hungry for God, go deeper with God, dig into scripture, and then trust him for the real life things they're struggling with. And that's what I long for. So when I get comments like that, that's really exciting.
Yeah. Even like I said, when I was talking with that guy it was last night, on Saturday night, someone who had read my first book, and he was halfway through the second one, like in 3 days, and he was like, he had just devoured them, and asking all these questions. And there's a part at the end of the first book, which, the guy I paid good money to edit told me to cut out. Not to cut out for good, but he said, you should make this a whole other book. And I'm like, no, the first book wouldn't be complete without this ending to me. And since I self-published it, I get to win. But no, there's a scene at the end, and I won't give a spoiler, but there's a scene at the end that everybody always says that's their favorite part. This part that my editor wanted me to wait till they said, that scene at the end, when you have these characters go through these things, and they all say something different. It's one of those poetic moments it's part of the story, but it's one of those moments that the reader comes to you and goes, "This is what I got out of it." And you're like,
something different.
They always, but
isn't that great that how people bring their own lived experience to the book, and their whatever struggles they're having, whatever doubts, whatever questions, and so what you get out of the book is going to be to them. And I love that.
Yeah, it's going to be unique to each
and it gives
reader.
room. It gives so much room for the Holy Spirit. Yeah, and it gives so much room for the Holy Spirit to work. And people say, "Oh, it's just fiction. It's just a story." But how powerful is it that when you tell a story, people can apply it to their lives? Whereas if you are telling them a nonfiction, this happens. That's something other than their life. Whereas the fiction, just like Jesus's parables, that people can enter into and say, "Oh yeah, I get it. I lost a coin once. I remember that feeling." Or whatever parable he's telling, and people get it.
Well, and that to me is the power of story. And just to get a little spiritual, but someone said recently, and I've been talking about how the Bible never gives any morality or instruction apart from story. It's always embedded from Genesis all the way through. It's embedded in story, and that's
and relationship
and so that's why story has more power than argument, right? Stories have way more power than argument, and I'm not against good logic and arguing as an education and learning, and that's awesome, but that's why we believe in the power of story for everyone, because story actually brings us together as humans, because it brings out those universal struggles that we have and allow us to relate to one another and see each other as relatable people instead of, divisive and against one another.
And I think that's what marks, the telling of a good story, especially a fiction story. If you're able to pull out of it as much or more, so like sometimes I feel like I get more out of a fiction story than I do reading like a nonfiction, how to kind of book. And I think it's because it's able to get into the emotional root of kind of where you're at, and you're able to receive it that way. So when it's written well, you're going to receive more from it. Yeah. And speaking of story, kind of as we're beginning to wrap up here, you mentioned earlier that you've got a new series kind of coming out in 2019.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm so excited. Okay, so my agent and I were brainstorming. I had a gap where I wasn't doing very much writing because of health stuff, and I had managed over a course of 7 years to write a 4th book in the Restorer series. So I finished The Deliverer, and so that released, and then I said, but maybe, it's so hard with fantasy in the Christian market, and so maybe I should do romantic suspense or historical. What genre should I write? And he said, Sharon, even in your non-fantasy novels, you sneak in fantasy. Because I had started writing this romantic suspense novel that was going to be very standard and something that would be very marketable. But I have scenes that are in the point of view of the Tree of Life, because seeds from the Tree of Life survived Noah's flood, and then trees grew up around in secret places around the world, and then the tree is speaking. And anyway, he said, Sharon, you're a fantasy writer. So instead of trying to pretend and sneak some into a regular genre, I think you should do straight fantasy. But he said, do something very different than Restorer. Don't do a portal fantasy. Don't have anybody from our world. And he said, one of the things that you haven't drawn from in your novels, because I've got 8 novels out now, and I drew a lot from music because I have a background in music, and they drew from other aspects of my life as a parent and whatever. But he said, I know, because his daughter is a dancer, and he said, I know that you taught ballet, you were a choreographer, you were a dancer, and you've never brought that into your books. And so why don't you do a fantasy series where dance is an integral part? And I thought, maybe I'm ready to do that. Maybe I'm ready to draw from my experience as a dancer. But then he said something like, she could flit around and it would make the flowers grow. And I just thought that was most lame idea. But I hung up the phone and I kept thinking, and this world just came to me, and the character came to me, and she was this dedicated dancer who wanted to join the order, and the order is this monolith that runs the world. And then I realized, and the dancers who make it into the order, their feet literally turn their floating world. They steer their world. It's a floating island, and the way they dance and the patterns they do, and their feet move their world. And to me, it just really looked at that theme of when mankind thinks they can run the universe, and how what a slavery that is. So she's just enslaved by this desire to be perfect, to get accepted into the order, and then begins to see the cracks and see the lies behind the order. And the entire world, the entire floating island world, has completely forgotten that there ever was a maker. It's all about humans. They are everything. And anyway, so I don't have to go into more, but it's called the Dancing Realms series, and the first book is called Hidden Current, and the young dancer eventually escapes, and then all kinds of cool things ensue. So
nice.
I really love having creative kind of little niches of stuff like that in writing. Like at the end of your Restore, and I don't know, I haven't looked into the other ones, but the end of Restore, I peeked back there, and you gave 2 songs that you wrote. Like you have the actual sheet music.
Yeah, my son did the score.
Okay.
I did the lyrics which are in the book, they're like, and then I said, we may as well put music to this. Yeah. So my son was a music composition major at the time at college, and so he composed the music, and then we put the score in the book just as a little bonus.
Yeah.
But I have to fess up that he just yelled at me all the time, because rhythmically it works for poetry, but it doesn't work for lyrics. And so when I said, now just put music to it.
Yeah.
It's like, it's all wrong, Mom. You don't understand. It's just all wrong. We have to change this word. We have to change this emphasis. We have to move this syllable. And it's like, no, it's fine. No, Mom, it's terrible.
Yeah.
That's funny. No, I love that. I even sat down and tried to pick out some of it. Yeah. And what resonated with me is actually the way that Britt and I got introduced was, I've got this secret mission for myself, this secret project that with my books, I want to basically release a soundtrack that goes with them, because whenever I read, I'm listening to music. Whenever I write, I'm listening to music. When we're watching things, there's music that goes with it. So I was like, man, I want to develop a soundtrack. And I knew one of his good friends. I didn't know it was his friend at the time, but she's, she makes her own music, and my brother's a musician. They were working together. And I talked to her about this idea, and she's like, that's a really cool idea. I can't really help you with the, making music part, but you should talk to my friend Britt. And so, like, through this, added creative avenue into my writing, it's how our relationship got started, and that's how we got this writers group started and podcast. And so it's still something I want to do. So when I flipped through your book and I saw you had that in there, I was like, yes, someone else that gets it. Like, music is so important to storytelling. Like, why don't we have it in just our books and stuff? But
so as we're wrapping up, let's tell everybody how they can find you.
Sure.
Like, what are some? I know you're on Facebook. What are you on Facebook?
What am I? I am Sharon Hinck, Hinck. So I have a Facebook author page there, and then I have a website, SharonHinck.com. So it's easy to find. And that has all my books. It has fun things. It has a multimedia page where I've done some TV interviews and things. And one of my boys, when the Restorer came out, did a little book trailer video that he shot and produced and put, so just fun videos and audio visual thing. I think there's actually some music clips of some of the songs from the various Restorer books on that page. Just lots of fun things. And there's also a page of tips for writers with some of the best resources that I can recommend, and so lots of things to explore. So yeah, people are welcome to visit my website, and there's a contact me page, so people can drop me a line, and I check my emails probably too obsessively. So I usually answer pretty quick.
And if someone wants to get a hold of your books, are you on Amazon or
Yep,
bookstores?
Amazon, I think Barnes & Noble, a lot of libraries carried them. They've gone through 4 different publishers and 4 different editions now.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
I'm not sure if like your local library will have the latest edition, but right now all 4 books of the Restorer series are with Enclave. And so you can also just go directly to the Enclave site or go to Amazon.com and just look under Sharon Hinck and you'll find all my books. And then my Bethany House books, they still have Stepping into Sunlight as an ebook. I don't think it's in paperback anymore. And then I got the rights back to my first 3 books. So the Becky Miller books are available for Kindle as ebooks. I don't have them in paperback right now, but they're all my other books are available as ebooks. So you can find everything at Amazon.
Nice.
Awesome. Well, it's been such a blessing to have you.
It's been awesome
on here. Yeah, and just being able to talk with you and dialogue about writing and your writing, and I love it.
It's always fun talking about writing, especially talking about God and writing and faith and themes and all that good stuff.
We'll have to have a part 2 sometime in a few months.
I'll come back when the new book comes out.
Yes.
That'd be cool.
Perfect time.
When's
it coming out?
It was supposed to be out in June, but I just heard that they're going to do July, so sometime in July. Thanks so much. Really
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Well, it was a blessing for us as well, so thank you so much.
So that means that you can tweak it and make me sound brilliant.
Exactly.
Well, you already are brilliant. That's not going to be hard.
That's the
I can
kind
make
of
me sound
technology I
brilliant.
want.
Yes, exactly.
I want technology where you crank up the wisdom button and turn down the stupid comment button.
Yeah, it's like,
no,
just cut that
if
out.
we ever have you seen Terminator? We should never give technology anything like make technology. Every time people start talking about what technology can do, I'm like, have you watched the Terminator?
Let's
movies?
keep that in our hands. So I guess we'll give him an official start.
Yeah. What do you want to do? You want to give a little slap or a little, not slap me?
No,
a little
no.
smack or like a little.
No, I'm just, we'll do the intro.
No, okay.
Yeah.
Go for it.